Endgame by Omid Scobie is a book about where the British royal family is right now at this critical juncture. And it takes a look at some of the things that are inhibiting forward movement, such as the palace courtiers and the relationship with the British media. And one of the ways that Scobie illustrates this toxicity is through the way Prince Harry was covered as a teenager. Really quickly, this is Mark Boland. He was the private secretary for Charles and Camilla in the late 90s to the early aughts when they were rehabbing Camilla Parker Bowles' image so that she could be palatable as the next wife of Charles to the public. He was called a spin doctor and his tactics were brutal. Quote, Boland also was accused of approving a News of the World scoop, claiming a 16-year-old Harry was taking drugs in exchange for spinning the story into one that praised Charles as a caring, involved father, end quote. Then goes into the rehab visit, but I'm not going into too much details because I'm pretty sure I'm getting mass reported. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about this Harry drug-taking story. Harry talks about this particular story being published in his memoir, Spare. The story just happened to be published when the person at the helm of News of the World was Rebecca Wade, formerly Rebecca Brooks, who also happens to be a friend of Mark Boland. Yes, the private secretary to Charles had a ton of connections on Fleet Street. He talks about seeing all of these lies printed as a teenager, that the editor had clearly gotten her mitts on some photos of Harry paying a visit to a rehab facility, took them out of context and spun them into this story of Harry on a bad path. Quote, more, I felt heartbroken at the idea that this had been partially the work of my own family, my father and future stepmother. They abetted this nonsense. For what? To make their own lives a bit easier? End quote. This idea that the timeline was fudged to suit a narrative comes up in this article from The Guardian from 2003. The way Boland tells it in 2003, he had been wrestling with News of the World about these partying claims. Trying to be careful with my words right now. Quote, we had to make a choice. Did we fight again to stop these allegations appearing in the newspaper, or did we accept that the News of the World was going to print something and make the best of it? End quote. The answer is you fight it because it's not true, and it's about a teenager. And by make the best of it, he means make the best of it for Charles, whose popularity was in the gutter at the time. It goes into how Boland went with the latter and took it as an opportunity to spin it as Charles, the attentive father. Problem with the story is that Harry had visited Featherstone Lodge in midsummer, which would have been June, July, according to Boland's recollection. But the evidence of Harry's drug taking and drinking were gathered by the News of the World team later in August or September. Quote, in order to fit its revelations into the neat redemptive narrative supplied by Boland, the News of the World had moved them forward by several months, reporting that, quote, during a 2-month period covering June and July 2001, Prince Harry fell in with a bad lot, end quote. Boland admits that the sequence of events was distorted. And then this newest little piece from just last month, Confession of a News of the World reporter. She discusses how she and another journalist are told by the higher-ups to go to this polo match and then get into the after party where all the young royals would be in attendance. But it wasn't just that. They were told to, quote, swab the ladies' and gents' toilets for traces of drugs, end quote. The hope was to catch a teenage Harry in the act of something nefarious and illegal. It appears to be a pretty typical teenage party. There's some Smirnoff Ices, which is such a throwback. And basically the reporters now have to figure out what to write and what they can spin into something sensational. This would be creating a story versus reporting on a story. So at first they talk to the higher ups and then decide this is going to be a story about Prince Harry's excessive drinking and flirting with girls. Then the test results come back from the lavatories. The ladies' room is negative, but the gents' room comes back positive for a certain substance that the nostrils sometimes enjoy. It was really hard to come up with a new way to say that. So then the story morphs into teenager drinks and flirts to Harry at drink and drug bash. Mind you, Prince William was also there. And they are careful because while they don't say that it's Prince Harry engaging in that activity, the implication is clearly there. Just like one little problem in these detective skills. They didn't wipe down the surfaces of the bathrooms before the party started. So there's no way of knowing if that positive test was from that night or from another event. Obviously, this reporter is now talking about this anonymously because she has regret about the way she acted. Like, this is how they were dealing with a teenager who had recently lost his mother. It's wild, not to mention unethical. Then you throw in the fact that Mark Boland and to some extent Charles and Camilla were in on it, and you're like, maybe the system does need an overhaul. Maybe the current media relationship and the lack of actual checks and balances on the institution and just creating instead of reporting on stories is a problem.